Hey everybody, welcome to, I guess we're doing Visioncon over the web, virtual Visioncon. So my name is Ariana Bauer. I run Cosplay Sewing School, and today I am going to be showing you guys how you can sew with foam and make really cool stuff, especially if you don't come from, so a little bit of my background first, I guess, would be helpful. I have been sewing for 30 years. I have made everything from bridal. I actually worked in bridal for a while. I loved it, hated it, you know. It's not the bridezillas, it's the momzillas. Anyway, so I love doing fancy dress, you know, the old school kind of British term of fancy dress. I love costumes. I've been costuming since I was a kid. My grandma is actually the one that taught me to sew, and she actually loved costumes herself, and my mom did pageants and did a lot of costuming for her pageants. So I always grew up with this great love of costuming, discovered cosplay and the ability to make my costumes and wear them somewhere more than just on Halloween where people didn't appreciate my work, and kind of landed around here. So I don't love glue, which meant I didn't love foam for a very long time. And I don't like heavy things on me. I don't like thick stuff, and I don't like all the sweat and the drama that comes with foam. So I was working with some of my friends. I am friends with the guys over at SKS Props, my favorite foam, by the way, but I love all the foam, but that's my favorite. Just because, and you'll see why they offer some foam that's really easy to work with for what I do. So also working with Evil Ted and some of the other guys out there to think about different ways that people who come from a sewing background, like I do, can utilize foam while still utilizing all of our sewing skills. So I'm gonna go ahead and, yeah, I know the gem poster, right? Last year at DragonCon, I got it signed actually by the actress who voiced Jem. So I'm a big Jem fan. But I'm gonna switch to my overhead here. Give me just a second, because usually I use OBS, and this is, Zoom is a little bit, oh my goodness, it gave me like 10 cameras here. Let's see which one is the right one. All right, here we go. So what we're looking at here is a corset that is from Ariana Black, A-R-A-N-E-A Black. Her patterns are all free, by the way. They're some of my absolute favorite corset patterns out there. And so I was kind of trying to figure out something like an armor. I know I see a lot of Wonder Woman. I see a lot of things that are based off the design of a corset. And I know how to sew a corset really well. But what I wanted to do was figure out how I could make one that I could paint and do all the cool effects to without having to use glue. So here's what I concocted. Now, I did use a little bit of glue. I'll say I cheated just because I did want some of this to have a no-sew look on the edges here. So all of these channels here, these are actually boned channels. So something that bothers me a lot is when costumes are, when you're wearing them, when they kind of like have weird rolls. And I say they look very sad when they do. So unless you use a very heavy foam, you'll have a hard time keeping your foam from getting wrinkles in it whenever you sit and you stand back again. So in corsetry, we solve that using boning. Now this is actually, because the foam itself has some rigidity to it, I was able to utilize a much lighter boning. So this is actually the very cheap plastic boning, and unfortunately I forgot to bring some of it with me today. But you can see when you wear this, this is going to bend like a corset. It does have some move, but it's not going to, I'm pushing very hard, it's not going to wrinkle when you wear it. So I'm going to show you guys the inside. So in here, I want you to see, this actually is all sewn. And you'll see there's fabric on the inside. Now, mind you, I actually didn't know if this was going to work when I did this. So I used some actual old sheets. Any sort of cotton, lightweight fabric, I like to use with the foam. So that's kind of where I started from. So what I did is I fused, and I'll show you guys, we're going to do a bit live here, but I show you how I fused the panels onto the individual pieces of foam onto fabric. And then I sewed them actually using just a long stitch, similar to the way you would vinyl or leather. So at this point, I essentially treated it like pleather, and it worked. It's actually ridiculously sturdy. You can see those grommet channels, like I am actually shaking, I am pulling hard, those grommet channels are not going anywhere because I have boned the grommet channels like I would in a traditional corset, boning on either side. And then the only thing that I did glue in this is just this outer edge here. So you can see I sewed it from the inside as a binding, and I just glued down with a little bit of super glue on the outer edge here, and it went down real fast. Super glue is kind of my preferred go-to glue. Now this one travels cons with me, so it has seen a little bit of wear and tear, but this is because I did not really do a lot of work on sealing this on the outside of the foam. I actually just direct painted the foam with red acrylic. That was, I thinned it with a little bit of airbrush thinner. And I think it looks really nice. Like if I wanted to go through and do a bunch of work. Now, I don't know if you guys have seen my Shira, but my Shira is actually all designed. It's a full corset that is all designed this way with a sewn structure. And so I actually use this structure in armbands. So in my Shira armbands that I have coming down, or gauntlets, or whatever you want to call them, there's actually boning going this way in 3 sides of the channels. So when I put my hands up, it does not bend or move that way. So you can use this idea of boning channels. Now with the Shira one, I actually just sandwiched it in between 2 pieces of foam, so you can see it on top. But I do like to do this fusing of the fabric to the foam, and then utilizing this the way you would actually pleather or vinyl. So let's move on to some materials that we need. So a little out of order here. My most important favorite material in my sewing room is my heat and bond. Now there are other brands out there, so any of them will work. I have an affinity to the heat and bond because I just find that I get it to bond really well. It has low heat activation, which is really important with the foam. And so that we're going to use to actually get the foam on. So the way this comes is it has one side, and it's a little hard to see with, here I can try and see if I can turn my big light off. But it has one side that has glue on it, actually, and the other side has a thermal paper on it. So it's essentially kind of like the parchment paper, which is what I'd use if I was using one without a paper backing. So these can come both with and without a paper backing. It's essentially, you just look for fusible, like applique fusing, things like that. Another option, which this is kind of a hard to find product, but they have this free fuse. There's also a spray that acts as fusible, so you can use that. This is a powder that will be activated with the iron. Anyway, we're looking at it, we're basically looking that we want to get some way to glue the foam to the fabric. You can also use this. So this is oftentimes used for applique, for binding 2 pieces of fabric together. So I will use this to put, for instance, a heavy twill onto another fabric when I make a corset so that it can act like one layer. So there's a lot of great uses for this product. So give me one second. I think I'm going to turn my exposure down a little bit so you guys can see that better. There we go. I think that works better. All right, and we have some fabric. This is actually just some quilting cotton that I had. I just want to make sure it was nice and brightly colored for you guys. I have a brand new fresh roll of 2mm SKS Props foam. I'm using the 2. Sometimes I'll actually use 1mm foam, but we don't need any more than this. We're just going to use this foam for painting and for our outside effects. This is actually not designed to be the structure. The fabric and the boning were the structure. Now, if we want this to be even sturdier, we can fuse this to a heavier fabric like denim or coutil, or any sort of very thick, heavy, sturdy fabric. It doesn't have to be very thick, just sturdy. And that would give it more structure. So that the fabric that we select is part of that process. So something else we will need is, I do like to have some parchment paper, some nonstick parchment paper around. I use it all the time in my sewing room as opposed to a cloth on top of my fabric. I'll use this. my iron, keeps my foam safe, keeps my fabric safe. Nice stuff. All right, so when you get your foam and you have a fresh roll, there's always going to be a little spot where the tape kind of did its thing. I just used the opposite side, actually. Let's get a scissors. Here we go. And open that up. And if you guys have any questions at any time, go ahead and throw those out there for me, and I will answer them. All right, here we go. Let's get to watch me argue with getting tape off of foam, because we all know that's a pain in the butt. All right, and we do want to get this tape off though, even if it leaves a little bit of a marring, because otherwise we won't have a good fusing right there. Now, I think we got it all off. I'm just going to go ahead and cut a slice. All right, off like this. Now, I like to use a method called block fusing. So there's two ways that you can fuse, and this is some sewing stuff here. So there's two ways that you can fuse fabric together, or with, say, we were doing interfacing on standard fabric. We can block fuse, which means we fuse all of the piece to a bunch of fabric, and then we cut out. Or we can get the individual pieces and then do that. I like to block fuse. I find it easier because a lot of times the very edges of the fusing doesn't quite stay the way you want it to. So that's kind of where I go from there. So we're just going to get a piece of fabric here. And I'm going to make my fabric just a little bigger than the foam. All right. And this is all wrinkly. Oh no, what do we do? Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get our ironing board and our iron out. This is like an infomercial, you know, just stuff comes from the bottom and arrives out of nowhere. Here we go. So, by the way, ladies and gents and everyone in the middle, this is one of my favorite irons. This is like a $40 iron, but the Tefal irons over here have some of the best steam system out there. They're so easy to clean. Mine is a little embarrassing, it needs clean, but they are great. So we're going to go ahead and set this to no steam. Going to set it to about a 2 setting. We don't want it too hot for our foam. Actually, I'm going to rephrase that. We have to get that fabric flat. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back up to its max and get this here already. So we are just going to press out. Yeah, 2mm craft foam is okay to use. The reason I like to use specialized foams is because the foams designed for cosplay are not, they don't produce like nasty chemicals when heated. Just make sure you have it in a well-ventilated area if you're not using the better foams. I do believe though the craft foams don't have the nasty chemical in it, but floor mats do. They're kind of icky stuff. All right, so we got that nice and flat. Now, cool thing about this, whether you're doing this or applique, is you can actually trace onto this because this is paper. So you can cut out shapes and use it to trace on, and that works too. We are going to be a little bit here. I'm going to, now another thing that's cool about this is this doesn't have a direction that we have to use it. So I'm actually gonna fuse some of this here, and then I'll fuse some more, and then that way we can, did I cut enough? No, I'll save that piece later. Cut a nice strip here. So even though this is not as wide, say, as this length as this, we can go ahead and just strip onto there. I'm going to cut this off here. There we go. And you save all those scraps. It's all usable glue there. All those scraps. So I'm just going to put this here. There we go. Put that iron down there just for a second so we can see. And I'm going to make this a little smaller than my area. Now, when we do this, you could get some sticky stickies, which onto your iron or your ironing board, which is why we like to use a little bit of that parchment paper over here. So This is the wrong side up. So if it's very shiny and you put your fingers over it and if it has a texture, that side is the glue side. We put our iron down on that and we have a big old sticky mess that we don't want to have. So make sure we're going to start here. And we're going to fuse this to the fabric first. So when we're fusing to the fabric, we can go ahead and use our hottest setting on our iron because our fabric allows it. And I am just going to press, give it good pressure, and I am going to take this all around on this piece here. And just continue to go here 5-10 seconds. You'll feel it. You should be able to not like really put your fingers on it to touch it. All right. There we go. Now, see on these edges here, I actually did get a little on my ironing board, which I can clean off later, but it's preferential not to. All right, so here's the next step for good fusing, no matter what you're fusing. Wait for this to cool. If we start trying to peel the paper off right now, this is gonna pull the glue off with it. So we're gonna actually let this, we can move it a little, just like this, to cool it off, but really what we need to do is let this cool. This is the step that most people skip when they are fusing, and then you go, oh my God, my fusibles never fuse, my fusibles never fuse. Well, we have to let them cool. And I understand letting them cool is difficult. I am horrifically impatient. I hate letting mine cool, but touch it. Once you can, easily put your hands and it feels maybe a little warmer than room temperature, like this side hasn't cooled yet, then you're good to go. So we can just kind of let this go and cool. All right, now we're good. Now if I want to get this last piece, what we can do is go ahead and just kind of patch this on. You don't want to overlap it too much because we're going to get, that's the paper there. Okay, so when I want to fuse pieces like this, what I will do is come here in the middle, but not quite get all the way to the edges just to get it to stick. And then once that's, ow, see that gets really hot. I can turn it here like this and I can actually cut that without it wiggling around. Get all the way to that edge there. And there we go. So this product, although it's a little on the pricier side, it's not crazy pricey, but it's not cheap either. You can use every last bit of it. So that's the great part about it. All right, now I'm gonna let that cool. While I'm letting this cool, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and throw those into the chat for me, okay? Because I am here to help you guys learn this. Okay, so that is cool. So this is right if this is shiny. So shiny, not shiny, shiny, not shiny. I like shiny. Now, if you start to peel this and it does not come off easy and some of that glue comes back on, just simply put it back down again and go ahead and fuse more. So you can keep going and putting this paper down again. This is essentially the silicone fused parchment paper. So you can also save this and reuse it if you wanted to, I guess, for, putting down over paper, but we're not going to do that. All right. Trash done. All right. Unfortunately, we make way too much trash in cosplay. Now, I'm going to turn my iron to no steam, and I'm going to turn that heat down. So when you turn your heat down on your iron, just iron your ironing board a little bit. This will actually help dissipate some of the heat in your iron so that you can more quickly get it cooled down. Because if we touch this hot iron directly, as hot as it was, directly onto the foam, it's gonna go melty, melty. Melty, melty is not what we want. All right, so now we have a very full workstation, which never was a very good thing to have. All right, here we go. So now we have here, and we have our foam. What I am going to do next is we are going to take it from the fabric side. So I'm going to go ahead and place my fabric down, and I'm going to go ahead and put that onto my foam. And I'm going to just tuck this right through the middle here. we don't necessarily need this over top of here, but what I am going to do is put it under here because we have glue going to the edges and I don't want to glue this to my ironing board. So we're just going to go ahead and start getting this slow. All right. The trick to this is don't go too crazy with the iron. Slow. Okay. And while it's cooling, if you want this foam to stay really nice and flat, go ahead and drop something on it so it cools flat. The foam, we know, is heat malleable. Yeah, the polyesters and lamés will work. You just have to be really careful. You need to have one that is a low heat fusing because polyesters and lamés will melt as well. I've done lots of work with fusing with polys with no problem. Like I said, you just need to make sure that you have. So this is 2mm SKS Props foam, HD foam. You can do, the stuff from TNT is great. The stuff from the Yaya Han is great. Use what you have or what you can find. I like this foam because, well, honestly, my best friends are the suppliers. So like, that explains why I like this foam. Yeah, I like this just because I like it. It's gray. I work with it a lot. They're local buds of mine. I always shop local whenever I can. So we are going to, now look at this, check this out. We fused that. How much did we put there? Almost no time at all. So, and see how that stayed nice and flat. So anywhere where it's up, we can go ahead and continue fusing. The trick is good firm pressure and keep that iron moving, okay? And then let it go. We don't wanna go more than 5-10 seconds. After that, we'll start melting the foam. This stuff, the reason I like this heat and bond is it fuses really easily at lower temperatures. Some of the stuff does not fuse as well at lower temperatures. So there we go. Check that out. We have a really good firm bond. Now, if we start really tugging at this, we'll separate this from the foam because we'll actually start pulling some of the foam layering off of this. But that's not what we're after. We're going to seal all our edges. There will be no way to pull this foam back up. And even where it's fused really, really well, you can see I can't get that loose without actually destroying my foam. So we're going to go ahead and continue to block fuse this piece. Another thing is really important. Don't ever touch the face of the iron to this foam. That is a no-go. That will burn. And it will make a mess for your iron and for you. You don't want to do that. There we go. All right. I know when a lot of people start sewing, they're always like, I don't want to get the iron out. But the iron is your bestest friend. Having a great iron is just as important as having a great sewing machine. Actually, you can probably get a great iron. Well, I know you can for, really cheap. So there's really no excuse not to have a great iron. And these little ironing tables like this, I just want to show this to you guys. This came from IKEA. This was, I think, like $12. The one from IKEA, the biggest problem from it is it has a terrible work surface. So what I did is, I'll show you guys while I'm here, just a little plus, is you take this, you add some additional wool batting. I added like 3 or 4 layers of wool or cotton. Just make sure it's not polyester because it needs to be able to take a lot of heat in there. And then you turned your $12 ironing board into a beautiful, plush, great ironing board. So if you don't have room for a big one, get one like this. Perfectly usable. All right. So now we have a beautiful piece of foam fused to fabric. So now this foam can be treated like a vinyl or any sort of kind of fabric that you want to be treated. So what I will do is we're actually just going to go ahead and trim off the edges here. I always like to have extra. See how the frayed edges, they just don't make for pretty fusing and they cause issues. So I like to always have that little bit of extra because that really does make a difference in your final product. Here we go. We're going to cut that off, and we're just going to go ahead and cut right here. And no, I am not using my good fabric scissors. Do not use your good fabric scissors on foam. That's nope. Now, my foam is a little bit kind of topsy-turvy, right? You can see it wants to jump up at the edges, and that is because I usually press this and then immediately put a really heavy book down on it, and it will be beautiful and flat. Actually, that's a good trick. Even if you're just coming off the roll like this, you can get a bit of steam and then lay some books down on it all around after you've steamed it, and it will go flat as a pancake. So if we ever need to iron the surface of this foam like this, what we will do is put this silicone paper down here, just like that. Rub that along there. Now I'm going to go ahead and hold this while it cools, just so I can show you guys the difference of how the foam wants to lay flat. And see, we did not injure our foam. Cool. I do have a little bit of glue on the other side. All right, so now we have foam fused to fabric. We're going to go ahead and get rid of the ironing board and the iron because we are done with that part of the demonstration here. This is a transformer studio. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut this in half, and we are going to seam this. Now, when we seam foam, I do not use, I don't use a standard seam where you go like this and then you sew them together and then you come back out. That makes really bulky seams. So what I like to do is either use an overlapping seam like this or add another piece of fabric and zigzag down the center. So we'll go ahead and do both kinds of seams here. Actually. And I probably should have used my, yeah, I'm not using a ruler. Here we go. Let's straighten this up because we want to have those come nice together. Your rotary tool is your best friend with foam. There we go. Now, once we have this fused to fabric, we do want to pay attention to the grain of the original fabric that we are using, just like we would when we are sewing, because we don't want to be fighting with the grain of that fabric. I mean, I'm sure you technically don't have to, but I just go with it. So whichever piece my pieces are going to lay, like they would in an actual piece of sewn item, I do the same thing, attending to the grain. You notice I did not put it on the bias, or I use the straight grain or the cross grain. Both are usable. So let's get the sewing machine out here. This will take me just a second. I apologize for the multi-transformer studio here. All right, and then I am going to switch you guys to the sewing camera. Just a second. All right. Let's guess the camera game. Ah, there we go. We got the right one. You guys get to see the rest of the mess that is my studio. All right, so let's go with putting this on. Oh, I need to plug in the foot. That would be useful. Technically, I guess I don't. This one has a start and stop. I have never learned how to do the whole start and stop thing with my fingers because I've been sewing with a foot pedal for like my whole life. So that whole thing is just really weird to me. All right, so in order to do our trick here, we're going to do an overlapping seam. Okay, and that will, we can eventually fix seams on the front, you know, using any of our standard seam mechanisms. We could fill that. We can, you know, add another piece of foam on top. There's a lot of different ways we can do it, but we are going to have some things going on, some seams and stuff with overlapping or, you know, working with this. So that's just kind of the way this rolls. So let's go ahead and make a nice seam here. Now, we do have a little bit of issue. We cannot use pins in this. So to hold this, we can grab, where did I put my masking tape? Let me find my masking tape. There it is. We can grab a bit of masking tape. is down here. There we go. And just pop it here on the foam side if we want, or the fabric side, whichever. Now we'll take this off as our needles get close to it because this stuff will gum up your needles. It's not cool. Gum up your needles, doesn't make for fun. All right, now that is our pins. All right, and then let's go here. Now I am going to use a long straight stitch. Longer is better. So we're going to treat this just like we would vinyl or things like that. Now, the next step, if we put this now, the important part is we need to have the fabric side down. The feed dogs on your sewing machine will leave tracks on your foam. So you want the fabric side down. The other thing is if you have a machine where you can loosen the pressure, so on my big quilter, I can loosen the foot pressure and keep that up, I do that. Otherwise, we have two options. We have paper, or you can use water-soluble stabilizer. So this stuff is used for embroidery, and it is clear that comes in 2 weights. You can get this really cheap on Amazon. It's actually amazing for tracing patterns onto because you spray it with a little water and boom, it just shrivels up. So, and since your foam is water safe, I'm going to go ahead and use this. So this just protects my foam from my sewing machine foot. And since that is see-through, that is good to go. So I'm going to start a little bit. I'm not going to start all the way at the edge because I don't want, as I would with fabric, you don't want anything getting sucked down in or messing with that edge. So we're going to go ahead and start with nice long, and we're just going to go slow. And I just picked a random place to sew. All right, and as I'm coming to the edge here, we are going to, sorry if you couldn't see that, forgot my hand was in the way. That was so weird sewing on camera. All right, so there we made it. This is a very strong seam. Now, another thing that's cool about this stuff is if you're lucky, it will, yep, this one isn't gonna tear. Some of it will tear. If we have paper, it will tear. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut this so you can see it better. I didn't bring my water bottle. I usually have a spray mister, and it's on the other side of the room. So I'll just cut this here. And I promise this stuff is made from cornstarch. That's what's really cool about it. It'll just like turn into, it'll kind of be a sticky globby mess, but it's cool. And I did not remove my masking tape, which was not so smart. There we go, because it's bright blue. There we go. We have a sewn piece of foam that is stable, and this will not pull through. So like I said, we could take an extra piece of foam, glue it down on top, and actually have our seam. We could fill this seam and fill over here. I will use various products, but I'm an acrylics person, so I tend to use modeling paste and actually fill that, and sand it. So that's one option. So let's get our foam out and make a second option here. Seam allowance, you want to have about 1/8 of an inch. You cannot go super, super close. Now, what you can do is go further, like I did on this one, and then I can come in here and trim it back. It's better to have more than less. You can always trim away. It's just easier to get it through the machine. So now that I have that, I have trimmed that, and I have a nice lapped seam, if that makes sense. Hopefully that made sense. All right, where did my, okay, does everybody lose stuff like I lose stuff? I lose my scissors, I lose my, like it can be right in front of me. I swear, it's like the crafter's, it's the crafter's curse. And I'm a lefty, so this is a weird angle for me. All right, so we're gonna do, I'm gonna cut that again. I did a terrible job. There we go. Live mistakes. Now here's the deal. You have to do it right the first time. If you continue resewing, if you take it loose and resew it, yes, you have this, these holes are permanent. They do not come back out. So you really want to make sure that this is right the first time. So make samples, test what you're doing, you know, all that kind of stuff, because once it's sewn, it's sewn. Now you can rip it loose. You'll see here, like if I take this loose, but see how those holes are still there? And if you don't get in the same holes, you'll put enough holes in it that the outer foam, so the fabric will stay, but this outer piece of foam will start to separate. That is still fixable, by the way. I have had to take things loose and put it back together, and I fix it up with, you know, various glues and et ceteras, but it's not fun to fix. So just so you know, preferentially try not to do that the first, you know, do it right the first time if you can. So what I'm going to do, and by the way, both of these kinds of seams are doable in fabric as well here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this piece on here. I don't know if you guys, can you guys see that okay? There we go. Like this. Okay. And what we're going to do is sew a zigzag seam to sew these two together flush. And we're using this extra fabric in the back here just as a way to make sure we have reinforced this seam. Okay, so we're just going to put a little bit of tape to keep this all in place. Masking tape is our friend. All right, and when I'm doing this, I'm just making sure this is really butted good and close together. Preferentially tear some masking tape ahead of time and not use your ultra wide masking tape. I like to just keep the cheap masking tape around for sewing purposes. There's so many good uses for masking tape with fabric. All right, there we go. So now we have this nice piece here. Now this is going to be an easier one to cover up. Now for this, we're going to go ahead and use our widest zigzag. Oh, which one is the zigzag? All right, let's do here. And we're gonna just place our seam right down the middle. We're gonna do widest, so we're gonna do a little, not terribly long, but somewhat, you know, medium length. Let's see how that looks. Oh, that needs to be way, 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 way longer. There we go. And all we're gonna do is zigzag over this. I actually think that needs to be a wider zigzag. Let me see how wide this machine will go. This is not my everyday machine. This is like my extra girl. There we go. Oh, that would help. All right. Oh, and I'm going to show you guys what this looks like when you don't put the paper down, because I didn't put the paper down. And I should have. All right, so now we have a seam here. Now, see how my machine was skipping and being all kinds of weird and how I injured the foam here? That's because I didn't put my paper down. Had I put my paper down, this would have come out beautifully, but I didn't. So, you know, mistakes, right? Now we go back here and we can take all our masking tape free and we can trim things up in the back. And if you have, at this point, if you have pinking shears, and I will show you guys what those look like. I'm not sure everybody is used to these. So this is called pinking shears. They are a zigzaggy kind of cut on the end, and these have been used forever and ever. Your grandma probably would know what they are if she is a sewer. These have been used forever to cut fabric in a way that it doesn't fray. So when you use pinking shears, sorry for my, I should put the camera from the other side because I'm left-handed, but there we go. See how that produces that zigzag edge there. We could glue this down. We can do a lot of things to kind of keep this. Now this is going to be the easier seam to cover though, because with a little bit of work, a little bit of paint, once you put sealer on here, you know, you put your primer, you put all your stuff, this is going to be a pretty much invisible seam. And the wider your zigzag, the stronger your seam. Another option is to zigzag down here and down here again for reinforcement. Like we could go here and on the other side, if this is going to be in a really tight spot, like in a corset, although this is a stronger seam for a corset than this one, but either way you throw it, that is how you sew with foam. So do we have any questions? Would you ever backstitch? Yeah, I guess you can. My preference is to actually pull my tails long before I start, and then pull them long at the end, which I didn't do in this demo, but I can show you guys. So basically, you're gonna get your tails through and keep them long and not use the cutter on the machine like this. That way you can tie a knot. It's only because backstitching makes more holes. Another option, which I do all the time with my foam, is just a quick dab of super glue at the top and bottom. And that, you know, that will take care of the top and bottom of that seam. I mean, we're gonna be painting this. So the thing of it is when we're painting, that's gonna seal everything up anyway. So I don't worry about it too much on the foam. Foam, leather, POL, vinyl, like all that stuff, I tend to not backstitch because it just kind of adds more holes where I don't need holes. Yeah, Alyssa, hand sewing does take forever, although I adore hand sewing. To me, it's one of my pastimes that I sit and do. I love embroidery work and handwork, so that definitely is something that I enjoy to do. Any other questions? How do I finish the, are you talking about the fabric or the foam itself? So if you're just tuning in, several ways that I finish. Let me go back into my overhead here. This will be a little easier to see. Ah, I lost my mouse. It's under stuff. Give me just a second. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to stop my video. Too many clicks. So there we go. So this corset has the finish on it. So I actually just took a piece of foam that was just a length of foam, cut it. I sewed it to one end, and I don't know if you can see the stitching in there. I sewed it to one end, glued down here, folded over, glued down here, and that is the finish on the edge. You can finish your foam a lot of different ways. So, you know, I don't worry about it too much because the fabric is fused. And you can see here, I left my edges raw because it's fused to the other fabric. So it really doesn't fray wherever the foam is. So this part here, that's not gonna fray. It's fused to the foam, it's glued. So you don't have to worry about that. You know, I also like to add into my foam pieces an additional internal piece of lining, something that either snaps in, Velcros in, whatever, that's washable, so that I can take that liner in and out and actually be able to not have like grossness that sticks in the foam, like smell, sweat, you know, all that kind of stuff. So on a lot of my pieces, I will add a little sort of liner, some way that I can have something fabric that touches me. I don't like foam to touch me directly. I'm kind of weird. I'm just not used to it, you know, it's new. I come from sewing, so I want everything to be fabric, and I want to treat foam like fabric. Now, here's what's cool. Once you can treat foam like fabric, then you can use sewing patterns. So you open a whole new world. So something that's really cool to have is a base pattern, like they're called slopers or blocks, something that fits you that you can alter from. And you can take things like, you know, a standard princess seam top. Oh, now that's princess seamed armor. That's a pretty common thing to have. You know, you can go with any sort of pattern that wouldn't be normally for clothing and work with it in your foam. And you'll have to adjust, you'll have to make it bigger because the foam doesn't want to stretch to your body. Now there is actually a stretchy version of the heat and bond, which is really cool. It doesn't super stretch, but it does stretch a little, where you could actually put that foam onto Lycra. But generally our paint doesn't really enjoy the stretching, so I wouldn't do that there. I'll also do things like, it's not on this one, but on my Shira, I have a zipper that comes down the back, and on either side of the zipper, I have a panel of spandex that I use essentially as an elastic panel to help with breathing, sitting, going, like being able to move. And the hair is really long on that piece, so you can't even see it. And it's just a trick that I use to make my foam things feel better when I wear them. So that's another great thing, is that I can now sew this to regular fabric. So let's say I wanted to take a piece of foam like this, and now I'm attaching Lycra here, or I'm attaching some other kind of fabric, or I'm building this into a legging. I can sew these pieces then onto a legging, onto a shirt, onto another piece of armor. So the corset pieces here are actually done using channels. So what you do in this methodology that I used here is to use a very large seam allowance. So there's a very large overlap in, there we go, let me cut this. So similar to how we did this, what you would do here, let me cut this piece apart and I will show you. Let's cut this here. So we have this piece and we have this piece. I would make a very large panel like this, and you sew here and you sew here, and that makes an internal channel. So you're using those lap seam allowances to make a channel. And then you push your boning into the channel that you just made. Another way to do it, the way I did it on my Shira, is I built individual pieces, put those on top, sewed those down, and then made an external boning channel, which you can also make on the inside. So you could do your internal boning channel by leaving your foam on the outside and then putting another piece of fabric to the inside. In that case, I would then go ahead, and the reason I love 1mm foam actually is, let's say I wanted this to be fully smooth, I could take a whole nother layer of 1mm foam on top, and I'm still not remotely near the thickness of a standard piece of foam, even a 6mm piece of foam. So this thing weighs like 2 ounces. You can make huge armor pieces with no issues at all. Another cool thing about the boning is that the plastic boning, you can actually heat it and it will stay where it's put for the most part, but still have spring in it. So you could build things like large shoulder outs, where then you can do something where you have supported your 2mm foam with heavier fabric, or something that's a stiffer fabric, let's say something like organza that's like got a nice crunch to it, a stiffness, and then that actually holds the piece out. So I'm actually very much in historical costuming as well, and so I take a lot of my historical costume and I apply it to modern costuming knowledge. So the use of structures, internal structures, utilizing things like boning, stitching methods, horsehair canvas, all that kind of stuff, it's all in my costumes, and I can now apply those with foam on the outside so that I can get paint effects on the outside while still having essentially what feels to me like a sewn garment, if that makes any sense. Anybody else have any questions?
I had a couple while we wait for other people to chime in on theirs.
Yeah.
And you might have already mentioned this, but like I said, I was messing around with my display and kind of the setup because I wanted to make sure nothing was going wrong. So you might have
problem.
This, so forgive me if you have.
No problem.
The gallery view. Okay. So why foam over, let's say, more conventional materials, let's say?
Well, this was done because I needed to have, I needed to match some pieces that were made from foam that were so I wanted all the colors to be the same. So this kind of started in my Shira because all my props, I needed to have the exact same color head to toe. So my Shira was from a statue. It was from the sideshow statue. So it had all this gold and white and gold and white and gold and white. And I'm like, how am I going to get my gold in my fabrics to match the gold in my foam, you know, in my prop work? So I decided, how could so then everybody's like, oh, just make the whole thing out of foam. And I'm like, ew, no, ew, foam. I don't do foam. So then I started thinking, well, darn it, I fuse everything else. So I had some scraps on the floor and I picked up the scraps and I tried to fuse it. And I'm like, that worked.
I mean, hey, that's an interesting way that's how you figured that out. One of our Visioncon reps did chime in and said that they've used a spray that consists of half vodka, half water mix to deodorize.
Oh yeah, I do that too, but I tend to, some body parts sweat more than others, and you know, you get like, you know, let's just be real, some people get like, I tend to get more heat rash. Mm-hmm. So like, I don't like stuff direct touching me, so I like to add that little extra layer, and sometimes things are not very soft from the inside, you know, so rather than have to wear like a bunch of extra undergarments and things, I'll add those little liners in.
And that works.
Yeah, it definitely works.
So what is it, the vodka, or is it any alcohol, or is it vodka specific?
No, the reason that you use vodka, and one of my very best friends actually works for the Repertory Theater in their costuming department. It has for years. It's a really big theater here in St. Louis. They use they don't even dilute their vodka. It's just like straight vodka. And the reason is vodka has no color, and it dries with no scent, and it has just enough alcohol to kill the stuff without injuring your clothing or any colors in any devices. So
yeah, interesting.
Yeah, just alcohol in a squirt bottle, you know. Then
That's
you can
drink,
squirt it in here, squirt it in there.
I never would have thought.
Yeah, it's an old costumer's trick, like from way back.
For sure. Now, how long have you been, like, you've been making these materials, but, okay, actually, before I ask that question, a commenter just asked,
will it affect the foam? Nah. I mean, you're not, like, saturating it. You just do, like, it's just enough till and you let it, and actually, if you put it out in the sun another 10 minutes after that, it doesn't take much. Just don't put it too long, because your glue will melt on your foam.
How long is too long?
Out in the sun? Well, it depends on what kind of glue
out in the
use.
sun. Never mind.
Yeah. No. Out in the sun. Like, sun will kill a lot of bacteria and stuff. So, like, you can set stuff out on, you know, in your car, like on your hood for a bit, and like it won't stink anymore. So, it's another anti-stink trick.
Well, while we wait for the more commenters to come in, let me ask you this. Now you make cosplays, correct? And, you know, fix them, et cetera. But what cosplays do you actually do that you're probably the most proud of?
My absolute favorite cosplay that I'm the most proud of is actually my Rainbow Bright, which I wore the first time I wore it was actually to 2 years ago, Visioncon. What a prize for it. But I love Rainbow Bright because she was my favorite childhood character. And I had always, like, my room was slathered in Rainbow Bright. And when I was at Visioncon, this was like the first time I'd had this particular kind of experience. There was 2 small children, and I was over in the hotel. Like, I wasn't technically at the con still. Like, I had walked to try and I was like on the search for coffee, like good coffee. So I was like searching everywhere, you know, and this little boy and little girl come screaming, Rainbow Bright, I love you. And like, they come up and like hugs come flying. And like, that was like the moment where I was like, oh my God, I am not just in character, I am the character. And it just kind of put this big kind of smile on my face, and I just could not stop smiling, because everywhere I go is Rainbow Bright. I get hugs, I get smiles, I get happiness. And so it's like the costume that is literally my mouth hurts from smiling at the end of the day when I'm in costume in that one, but it's so comfortable and it's so fun to wear. And so that's my absolute favorite, because it's not too difficult to wear, but I get a lot of reaction unless I'm at the really young anime cons, and then they're like, what are you?
What are you? I hope not. All right, we have one last question before we kick off here, and
I do commissions? Yes, yeah. I do, but for the most part, the commissions that I like to do are actually helping people build patterns. So I do private teaching, and I do one-on-one teaching, kind of just like what we did here. I'll build with you. And so while I do take commissions, I prefer to teach you. So I will happily work with you one-on-one to find everything you need for your project, start to finish, all your resources, head to toe, and we will do your project together, work on fitting, work on all that kind of good stuff. So that's where I tend to like to do, is I like to stick towards teaching rather than just doing it for you.
And is there anywhere like they can go to get that information and contact you, or like?
Yeah, so cosplaysewing.com. I'm Cosplay Sewing School if you just search it on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. So I am getting ready. I was taking a small hiatus. I had a death in the family and I was kind of offline for a good 6 months, but I am back, and I am starting up everything again. I sell online classes through Udemy and Skillshare, and I have my own site coming soon for that. So yeah, just Cosplay Sewing School. Just search it, you'll find me.
And then we will, if you wouldn't mind messaging us all that details, we'll get that for all of you guys, so you guys can take advantage of that. Ariana, thank you so much for coming on to Virtual Visioncon 2020. Any final thoughts before you head out?
Just have fun with your cosplay, experiment, test, just go with what you feel in your gut and makes you happy. And, if it's not working, try something else. It's all just for fun anyway. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ariana. I personally learned a lot. I'm sure all of the watchers did as well. Thank you so much, Ariana, and we will see you later.
Thanks. Bye.